What is up, everybody? This is your boy, Teran Rodriguez, bringing you another edition of Set Point. We've got another big show for you all, as we had quite a number of great wins last week, such as Michigan State, the Spartans going on the road and knocking off Purdue in 5 sets. What a big win for Michigan State. What a big win for Sparty. Awesome job. And how about LSU knocking off Tennessee? I tried to tell y'all that was going to be a trap series for Tennessee, but no one decided to listen to me. And how about UC Santa Barbara sweeping Hawaii? As the Big West Conference is getting interesting, as there's also some big news in the Big West Conference as well. We've got a lot of big-time matchups this week, ranging from the Big Ten all the way down to the Pac-12. So hand me a volleyball, set up the net, because I'm about to serve you some volleyball facts and information here on Set Point. This is Teran Rodriguez bringing you another edition of Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports. And welcome all to another edition of Set Point. Thank you all for joining me on this beautiful Monday evening. In Southern California, it actually did rain, so hopefully everyone isn't wet when it comes to walking, and hopefully everyone is safe, especially in the Northern California area, because I heard there was heavy downpours and whatnot, as it was bad weather from yesterday in the Bay and in Santa Clara and whatnot. So hopefully everyone is safe. But without any further delay, let's get on into that volleyball action. But first and foremost, we have a word from our sponsors. So iSports Radio is sponsored by the Southern California Warriors semi-pro football team. The Warriors unfortunately dropped one to the Riverside Disciples 28-12. So they are 4-5 on the season. This weekend, they will be playing the Moreno Valley Mercury. I want to say the game is at Moreno Valley or wherever the Mercury play at. Not 100% certain, but they will be playing the Moreno Valley Mercury. The SoCal Warriors are 4-5 on the season. They're hoping they can get into the playoffs. If they get to 5-5, I'm hoping that's enough to get them into the postseason. That would be great if they did, but I digress. The world of semi-pro sports is unlike any other sports organization. Players pay to play in hopes of so many different outcomes, whether it's playing to get film to try out for professional teams, big-time colleges, or just playing to stay in shape. No matter what, all semi-pro players have one thing in common, and that's playing for the love of the game. The SoCal Warriors have been on a quest to earn titles and give players second chances since 2017. Whether you're in Southern California or anywhere in the world, give semi-pro sports a chance if you love your sport. You may get the second chance you've been waiting for as an athlete. You can follow them on Twitter at SoCal Warriors. You can follow them on Instagram at SouthernCalifornia_Warriors. You can also follow them on Facebook by typing in the word Southern space California space then Warriors. And then the second sponsor for IE Sports Radio is Background Check International Businesses. Are you looking to background check a new hire on? Let Kit Fremen take care of that for you. Kit has founded and managed Background Check International Businesses since 1994, and he's here to help you with the screening process. Contact Kit and let him help make the hiring process that much easier. Disclaimer. This business, however, is used for professional background checks and not for the use of any crimes such as identity theft or any other illegal activity. Unfortunately, Background Check International Businesses does not have Twitter and Instagram, but they do have Facebook by typing in the word background, then check, then international, then put a little dash by it, then put BCI. You can also follow them on their website, www.bcint.com. So thank you to Background Check International Businesses and SoCal Warriors for being the official sponsors of IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that sports. You could check IE Sports Radio out on Twitter and Instagram at IE Sports Radio. You could also follow them on Facebook. And you could also follow IE Sports Radio on their website, www.iesportsradio.com. Now, without any further delay, let's get on into this volleyball action. So, we had ourselves quite a number of wins when it came to the NCAA women's volleyball scene from last week. Excuse me while I accidentally kicked something, so my apologies. Anyway, so we had a few upsets. Some upsets weren't really considered upsets in my book because, to me, it was just a battle of two really good teams. But some of these upsets were definitely classified as upsets. So we'll start off with the biggest upset of last week, Michigan State versus Purdue. Long story short, I don't understand how Purdue lost this one. This was at Holloway Gym. This was basically a home game for Purdue. And Michigan State beat the brakes off them in the first set. And then sets 2 and 3 were close as Purdue won the second set. And then Michigan State won the third set. Purdue beat the brakes off of Michigan State in set 4. And then set 5, Michigan State was able to pull away and win. So Michigan State was... surprisingly, I didn't even know how good Michigan State was. I didn't even think they had a chance because Purdue was coming off of I wouldn't say a rough weekend, but a rather up and down weekend. I think they kind of had a little bit of a hangover from their win over Penn State. As Sarah Franklin led Michigan State with 25 kills, she only had 3 hitting errors, and she hit .386. Now, this stat really jumped out to me. Michigan State out-hit Purdue 313 to 208, which is darn right impressive. And then they out-aced Purdue 7-4, though they did miss a lot of serves, missing 16 serves compared to Purdue's 2, which is rather surprising. And also Purdue outdug Michigan State 69 to 56, which is a little surprising. Michigan State did make up for that category as they outblocked Purdue 9-7. So there was that right there. But still, the hitting of only 208 and then having the opponent hit 213 is rather concerning. I didn't think that Michigan State had it in them when it came to that. But I guess this shows that no one is safe. Purdue only had 2 players in double digits in terms of kills, as Caitlin Newton and Grace Cleveland, a.k.a. the two-headed monster, were the leaders in kills with 22 and 16 kills respectively. Michigan State also got contributions from Cecily Max Brown, who had 17 kills, and then Naya Groves had 10 kills. Again, I was very surprised to see Michigan State hitting 313. It's like, how does that happen? Like, come on. So yeah, that's not a good loss for Purdue. It makes the Ohio State loss or any other loss to Purdue look a little less bad, but I don't know. I couldn't believe Purdue was just off its A game. Like, I guess it's any given night when it comes to the Big Ten, but still, it's rather surprising. Anyway, so the next upset we have is from the Big West Conference. This happened on Friday. That upset between Michigan State and Purdue happened on Wednesday. This upset happened Friday with Santa Barbara and Hawaii. This took place at UC Santa Barbara, and the Gauchos swept Hawaii. So this was a huge win for the Gauchos, just because Hawaii has kind of been a thorn in everyone's side. And more importantly, that Hawaii is always the premier team in the Big West Conference. And UC Santa Barbara has had themselves quite the up and down year. Like, they're performing well in Big West Conference play, but they didn't really perform well in non-conference play. Like, their non-conference win-loss ratio is rather, I wouldn't say laughable, but it left a lot to be desired. So for Santa Barbara to get this big of a win, especially the weekend after they lost to UC Davis, which I can't believe that happened, I'm rather surprised that Santa Barbara was able to win. I know it was at home, and I know Hawaii hasn't really had its big or best season, but I honestly expected better from Hawaii. But to get swept on the road, I know they showed resilience in set 3, but the first 2 sets were so unlike Hawaii. As a whole, Hawaii hit only 174 compared to Santa Barbara's 159, or 359. And then also, the Gauchos outdug the Rainbow Wahine 52-45. This was the stat that really blew me away. Santa Barbara outblocked Hawaii 11.5 to 3. And that's as a team overall, which is very concerning if you ask me. Like, you cannot do that against UC Santa Barbara, and in a big conference game such as that. So I don't know how to defend Hawaii on this. They didn't even have a service ace. Nothing really went right for Hawaii. I don't know what happened. I didn't see the game, but I'm just going to say this. I expected better from the Rainbow Wahine. But Santa Barbara deserves a lot of credit. They were led by Rowan Ennis, who had 11 kills, while Abrielle Bross and Michelle Owobite had 10 kills each. And they don't, as a team, Santa Barbara only had 7 hitting errors. That just goes to show you how consistent they were. And they looked so loose, relaxed, and free, because when you're playing a tough opponent like that, all the emotions are going to be up. You're going to be jittery. And when you're playing Hawaii, you have to be at your best, because Hawaii is such a good program. They're very well disciplined, well coached, all that stuff. So for the fact that Santa Barbara played that complete of a game, this is definitely their biggest win of the season. There's no doubt about that. And they could be 10-0 had it not been for that loss to Davis, but the Big West Conference has been such a roller coaster. I'll be circling back to the Big West Conference later on the season, or later on the show. Anyway, so the last true upset for me, in my opinion, was LSU taking down number 20 Tennessee. So when it came to this upset, I said last week that this could be a possible trap game for Tennessee, just because this week, this upcoming week, theoretically last week, Tennessee had Kentucky after this, and I kind of think Tennessee might have looked ahead, because Tennessee and LSU played twice last week, and the first match, Tennessee actually wound up winning in 5 over LSU, and then the second matchup, LSU pulled the upset. Now, the sets weren't really blowout sets. Like, LSU won the first set 25-20, and the same with the second set, and then the third set, it was 25-23. However, in sets 2 and 3, LSU never tied and they never trailed. That just goes to show that I think Tennessee might have been a little gassed from the previous night, and also playing on the road is so tough. And for LSU, they don't really have much to lose, considering LSU had some good expectations, and then Hurricane Ida came, and then also it did not help that they had some early losses here and there, and once again, Hurricane Ida also made it tough for them to play and practice and whatnot. So all in all, for LSU, this is definitely their biggest win of the season. This is pretty much on par with Florida, even though I think Tennessee is better than Florida. So for LSU, they were led by Taylor Bannister, who was one of the top players for LSU. She had 15 kills, and she was their top player returning from last season. But another player that really stood out, and I've been waiting for this player to have a big game for LSU, was Kylie DeBerg. She had 12 kills, no hitting errors, and she hit .480. This was very impressive by her. She is a transfer from Missouri. She'll be playing beach volleyball, and then also she will be finishing out her indoor career with LSU as well. As a team, LSU hit .368, which is very impressive. They aced Tennessee 5 times compared to Tennessee's 2. They also outblocked Tennessee 8-4, which is still pretty impressive. And they held Tennessee to only 228. And more importantly, Tennessee did not have one player crack double digits in terms of kills. The kill leader for Tennessee was Morgan Fingal and Lily Feltz, who each had 9 kills, and Brianna Runnels had 8 kills. The problem is that they ran a balanced attack, but I think Tennessee was not prepared for LSU this go-around. I think LSU is a underrated team. I think they're underappreciated just because they had such a rough start, and they knew they didn't have much to lose, and they knew they could beat Tennessee, and lo and behold, they did. So it's a disappointing loss for Tennessee just because they already had one bad loss to Texas A&M, even though I think A&M is rather impressive. I think A&M is underrated, but I think that Tennessee could have beaten them, and they should have probably won the second matchup against LSU, but things happen. So all in all, for Tennessee, they have to get back on track. They do play a very tough Kentucky team this Wednesday. It's at home, so they'll get the luxury of being back home. But for Tennessee, this loss does not do their chances of winning the SEC any favors. So there's that. And that's pretty much it for the upsets. But while we're on the topic of SEC matches and trap series, I got to make note of Kentucky and Arkansas. So Kentucky and Arkansas went the distance not once, but twice. The first matchup between Kentucky and Arkansas, Kentucky took the first 2 sets, then Arkansas took the next 2 sets, and then Arkansas, I guess, just didn't have enough in the tank when it came to set 5, as Kentucky just won that set 15-8. And Kentucky held Arkansas to 171 in terms of hitting percentage, which wasn't bad. And some stats that really stood out were the blocking stats in that matchup. Kentucky had a whopping 14 blocks compared to Arkansas 7 as a team. They outdug Arkansas 73-66. And they held them to 171 hitting percentage, while they hit 277, which wasn't bad, but they had a balanced attack. They had 4 players in double digits in terms of kills, as Maddie Skinner had 17 kills, Allie Stumler had 15 kills, Azani Taylor, who I think is an underrated middle blocker, had 14 kills, and Reagan Rutherford added 12 kills as well. And Emma Grom has done a great job when it comes to setting, as she's filled in for Madison Lilly, who graduated from last year, and Grom had 53 assists. The only red flag that I kind of see is the red flag of the service ace versus service error game. Like, Kentucky had 2 service aces compared to Arkansas's 4, but in terms of the service errors, Kentucky had 9 service errors compared to Arkansas's 12. Like, if you're Arkansas, you cannot miss too many serves against Kentucky. And impressively, Kentucky only had 2 aces, and yet they still won. So, all in all, for Kentucky, this was kind of a wake-up call saying that they're not invincible, but at the same time, they're not that bad. It's just that Arkansas has drastically improved, as they were one of 4 teams that just missed the cut. They were the first 4 teams out, along with Tennessee. The second matchup was also pretty close, as Kentucky took the first set, then Arkansas won the next 2 sets, and then Kentucky won set 4 in one-sided fashion. Well, not one-sided fashion, but still, 25-16 is still pretty one-sided. Then in set 5, Kentucky was able to squeak out that 5th set win, 16-14, and that's how Kentucky was able to win. They had to go 5 sets on back-to-back nights against Arkansas. And this was at Kentucky, so the fact that Arkansas pushed Kentucky to 5 sets was rather impressive. Those 4 same players that I mentioned in the previous match, they all had double-digit kills in the second match, as this time it was Maddie Skinner and Allie Stumler leading the way with 17 kills. Taylor had 12 kills, and Rutherford had 10 kills. In terms of hitting percentage, Kentucky had a better hitting percentage than the previous night. They hit 290 compared to Arkansas's 203. In terms of service aces and service errors, Arkansas dominated the ace battle 9-6. The service error battle was kind of won by Kentucky, as they only had 11 compared to Arkansas's 13. Surprisingly, Arkansas outdug Kentucky 72-69. But once again, Kentucky really put the block all over Arkansas, as Kentucky outblocked Arkansas 16.5-5, which is very impressive. Like, that's when you know Arkansas's offense just couldn't flow fluidly. So, all in all, it was a great series between Kentucky and Arkansas. I had a feeling Arkansas would give Kentucky a tough matchup, but I didn't think it would be that tough of a matchup. But it just goes to show that Kentucky is not going anywhere in the SEC. So, continuing on with our noteworthy matchups from last weekend, we had Purdue playing Nebraska. Now, keep in mind, this was in the same week. This was 3 days after Purdue lost to Michigan State, and this was a big test for Nebraska, as Nebraska was undefeated in conference play, and Purdue had to bounce back from its loss to Michigan State. But for Nebraska, they were able to defeat Purdue in 4 sets. Nebraska at the time was number 9 compared to Purdue's number 7 ranking. Now, I don't think this is considered an upset. I think Nebraska is still good, and I feel most people don't give Nebraska enough credit, because Nebraska has had their bad losses, but I think they're starting to get better. Looking at the stats, they were led by Kayla Cafey and Lauren Stivrins, who each had 14 kills. The kill leader actually was Maddie Kubik, who had 15 kills, and Lindsay Krause had 13 kills. We also got some contribution in terms of Lexi Sun getting kills for Nebraska. She only had 4 kills. I don't know what the game plan is for John Cook, but it's apparently a good one, as he's playing his underclassmen. So, anyway, I have been hearing that Nebraska hasn't been getting a whole lot of love, and I think this match was the big matchup that made people put some more respect on Nebraska's name, as Nebraska held Purdue to only 123 in terms of hitting percentage. And despite getting outblocked 16-7, Nebraska outdug Purdue 70-62. They also held Purdue to only 1 ace while adding 6 of their own. And all in all, I think this was a better night for Nebraska. It's always tough to win at Bob Devaney Sports Center in Lincoln, Nebraska. So the fact that Nebraska was able to pull out that win is rather impressive. So good job to Nebraska. I was a little concerned for Nebraska coming in, just because I didn't think they really beat anybody too big time when it came to this matchup or the Big Ten. So the fact that Nebraska pulled off this win and they're still undefeated in Big Ten play is rather impressive. Purdue, I'm kind of losing faith in a little bit, just because, well, you split your matches last week against Ohio State and Penn State, and then you wind up losing to one of the low teams in the Big Ten, and then you lose on the road to Nebraska. It goes to show that Purdue has a lot of work to do. So thank you to Larry B that popped in the chat room. He says, Pitt loss, dang it. I'll be getting into that in a little bit. Continuing on in the Big Ten, we had number 14 Penn State beating number 12 Minnesota at Maturi Pavilion in Minneapolis, Minnesota. This was also not an upset to me. I think Penn State is just as good as Minnesota. To me, I think Minnesota is kind of a defensive-minded team, more so than an offensive-minded team, and Penn State is kind of the opposite for the most part. Penn State was led by Johnny Parker, who had 16 kills. Caitlin Horde had 15 kills. Allie Holland had 12 kills. And Adana Rollins, the former Minnesota player, had 11 kills. The fact that they had 4 players in double digits in terms of kills was rather impressive. And it was only a 3-set match. So that's impressive stuff. And both these teams hit high hitting percentage. Penn State hit 356, which is blistering, while Minnesota hit 289, which wasn't bad. They were led by Jenna Wenas, who had 15 kills. Ari Mayabi had 14 kills, and Stephanie Samity had 12 kills. In terms of stats that stood out to me, Penn State had 61 digs. Keep in mind this was a 3-set match. 61 digs compared to Minnesota's 53 digs. In terms of blocks, Minnesota got the better of Penn State 5-4. Yeah, it was 5-4. I thought I was doing my math incorrectly. Gina says, "What's up, Teran? Have a great show per usual." I appreciate you, Gina. Just recapping some volleyball that happened last week. And then, in terms of serves, the serving ratio in terms of service errors and service aces was pretty balanced. Both teams missed the same number of serves they aced in. So that's it. Now, Minnesota obviously had a disappointing night, losing in 3 sets to Penn State, but they bounced back in a big way as they took down number 6 Ohio State in 4 sets. Now, again, I don't think this is considered an upset. I think Ohio State has been rather flawed, and also to me, I think Minnesota is underrated. I think they're underappreciated, in my opinion, and sometimes they kind of draw they draw votes from the coaches just because they're kind of that favorite child in the Power 5 conferences, them in Florida from what I've heard. But Minnesota bounced back in a big way against Ohio State. Stephanie Samity had 22 kills, Ari Mayabi had 16 kills, and Jana Wenas had 10 kills. As a team, Minnesota hit 234 compared to Ohio State's 198, which isn't too bad, honestly. So, all in all for Minnesota, this was kind of the win that they needed in order to keep pace with with Wisconsin and all the other Big Ten teams that are atop the standings. Ohio State was led by Gabby Gonzalez, who had 19 kills, while Janasia Moore and Emily Landot each had 10 kills. Riley Rader added 8 kills, while Arca Davis had 4 kills. Surprisingly, we didn't get to see Mia Grunzi all that much. And Vanja Bukalic only played 2 sets as well. So I don't know what was happening with Ohio State, but all in all, this was not really the best week for Ohio State. Speaking of Ohio State, they played a match earlier in the week, and they played on Friday against Wisconsin, number 3 Wisconsin. This was actually at the Wisconsin Fieldhouse. So this was actually a rough week for Ohio State because they had to go on the road to Wisconsin, and then they had to go circle the wagon back to to Minnesota. So that's a brutal 2-game swing right there. And more importantly, it's basically 2 games in 3 nights. So, Nelly. That's a lot of traveling right there. And it's tough to win on the road, especially since both of those gymnasiums are some of the tougher ones to win at. So against Wisconsin was basically the better team, as Wisconsin was led by Dana Redke, who had 16 kills. She only had 1 hitting error, and that's kind of expected when it comes to Wisconsin and Dana Redke because she's such a dominating player. She dominates the middle all that well, and even though Wisconsin does not have Danielle Hart, who is out for the season due to a torn ACL, I really think this Wisconsin team is rather deep. Now, they have a lot to prove this week because I'll be getting into their matchups this week. Larry's talking about how Washington defeated Stanford. I'll be just quick hitting the Pac-12 after I get done with some of the noteworthy matchups, but I will be talking about the Pac-12. But since I talked about them a lot last week, I'm going to try to give the spotlight to some of the other conferences. Anyway, as for Ohio State, Riley Rader led the Buckeyes with 14 kills. She only had 2 hitting errors, and she hit 500, which is pretty good. Janasia Moore and Gabby Gonzalez each had 11 kills, and Emily Landon only played 2 sets, and she had 5 kills and 5 hitting errors. So, that's rather fascinating that Wisconsin was able to shut down Ohio State rather quickly. The first set was close, and then the second set was also close, Wisconsin winning both of those sets. And then set 3 was pretty much all Ohio State, and then I think in set 4, Ohio State kind of ran out of gas, and the clock struck midnight, which meant no upset for the Buckeyes. But Wisconsin is still in the hunt for winning the Big Ten, and I still think they can do so. Yes, they had that loss to Maryland, but ever since they lost in the first game of Big Ten conference play, they have not lost ever since. Another matchup that Wisconsin had on Saturday was they played Penn State. Now, this match went the distance. It went 5 sets, and a majority of the sets were close. Sets 1, 2, and 4 were close. Set 1 was won by Penn State. Set 2 was won by Wisconsin, 32-30, mind you. And then set 4 was also won by Wisconsin, 25-23. Set 3 wasn't that one-sided, but it wasn't like close, as Penn State won that 25-20. And then the 5th set, Wisconsin and Penn State it was just one-sided, as Wisconsin pretty much had more gas left in the tank, while Penn State was pretty much running on fumes, as they won that set 15-7. As Wisconsin was led by Dana Redke, who had 24 kills, only 2 hitting errors. She hit .512 on the season. She could pretty much be Player of the Year, possibly. And that is a possibly, not a guarantee. Julia Orzel added 19 kills, while Devin Robinson added 11 kills. That's the beauty about Wisconsin. Like, Wisconsin can have Dana Redke just carry the team the whole night. But if they get other players involved, like Grace Loberg and Julia Orzel and Devin Robinson, it just makes Wisconsin a much better team. Penn State was led by Caitlin Horde, who had 21 kills. Johnny Parker had 20 kills, and Adana Rollins added 10 kills as well. And Erica Pritchard chipped in 9 kills to boot as well. In terms of digs, this was kind of the alarming stat. Wisconsin had 90 digs compared to Penn State's 77, but Penn State outblocked Wisconsin 18-13.5. It was that defensive/offensive for both of these teams. And Wisconsin kind of won the service ace battle, winning it 7-3, but they missed 9 serves compared to Penn State's 5. All in all, for Wisconsin, they proved that it is very tough to win in Madison, Wisconsin, against Wisconsin. Penn State still has a lot to learn, just because Penn State, they're okay. They're not the greatest team. Like, this is kind of one of their more down teams in recent history. But I think Wisconsin, to me, is still legit. Now let's jump to the ACC, where we had a couple of noteworthy scores. The first one being Pitt versus Notre Dame. Now, like the Arkansas, Kentucky, and LSU Tennessee matchups, I thought this matchup was a complete trap game for Pitt, as Pitt barely won this one, as Pitt won in 5 sets, and the sets were kind of just alternating. Like, Pitt won the first set, Notre Dame won the second set. Pitt won the third set, Notre Dame won the fourth set. And then pretty much Notre Dame ran out of gas in set 5, as Pitt won the 5th set, never trailed, never tied, as Pitt ultimately won the match, as Lecator member Manet had 19 kills, along with Serena Gray, the transfer from Penn State. Kayla Lund added 12 kills, and Shinazia Endy added 9 kills as well. So for Pitt, the thing about Pitt is Kayla Lund cannot do it all by herself, and that was the problem with Pitt. They didn't have too many options outside of her. They obviously had a few options, such as Sabrina Starks and Shinaza Ende, but with some of these other players like Lecator member Manet and Serena Gray opening up more options offensively, it just makes Pitt so much more legit. And as for noteworthy stats, Pitt outdug Notre Dame 76-64. In terms of aces, both teams were practically even in both service aces and service errors. In terms of blocks, Notre Dame actually got the better of Pitt 21-14, which kind of makes me wonder how Notre Dame didn't win that 5th set. But I guess it was just throughout the entire match that Notre Dame they were just locked in when it came to trying to beat Pitt. And I think Notre Dame is a much better team than what its record indicates. I think if Notre Dame plays its cards right and they finish 500 or better, they could get into that NCAA tournament as an at-large. But it still remains to be seen. Their offensive output wasn't as big as Pitt's, as Aubrey Hamilton and Caroline Muth each had 14 kills. Lauren Tarnoff, who I kind of had high hopes in, had 8 kills. This was kind of the alarming stat right here. Charlie Nigo only having 7 kills, and she had 11 hitting errors. Obviously, she cannot do it herself, but Pitt really did a good job of limiting her and making sure she wasn't going to get hers all that much. Because when it comes to Notre Dame, Nigo is the best player on that team. And the fact that she only had 7 kills and she hit negative in the hitting percentage is kind of alarming. As a whole, Notre Dame hit 174, but I will give them credit for holding Pitt to only 193. And Pitt is one of the more better teams when it comes to having a higher hitting percentage. So there was that right there. Now for the big matchup that Larry B was talking about earlier in the chat room. Number 4 Pitt versus number 2 Louisville. Louisville just barely pulled out the victory over number 4 Pitt, as Pitt won the first set 25-19, then Louisville took the next two. The third set was actually 27-25. And to make sure I didn't mess up the number of set points that Louisville had, I needed to follow which team had scored which point and whatnot. And then in set 4, Pitt was able to grind out that fourth set 25-22, and then the fifth set, Louisville was able to squeak by Pitt 15-13. It was that intense of a matchup. Louisville had a blistering .338 hitting percentage, and that was rather impressive. They were led by... Pitt was the one with the .338 hitting percentage. Louisville hit .258, as they had 5 players in double digits in terms of kills, as Anna DeBeer and Claire Chaucy had 17 kills apiece. Anna Stevenson had 13 kills. Amaya Tillman had 12 kills. And Aiko Jones chipped in 10 kills. Both teams were pretty high in the blocking percentage, as Pitt had 14 blocks compared to Louisville's 13. In terms of digs, Pitt outdug Louisville 48-41, which is kind of surprising. Louisville won the service ace, service error battle, as they had 5 service aces compared to Pitt's 2 aces and 13 service errors, and Louisville only missed 12 serves, even though that's just one behind. But it's still rather impressive that Louisville, despite them allowing Pitt to hit over 300, they were able to win that match. And I even picked Pitt to win, but I guess Louisville is just on another level, and the rematch is going to be rather fascinating. And this kind of begs the question, is there any team that could take down Louisville? I mean, obviously anyone can beat anyone in any conference, as we saw with Michigan State and Purdue, but I think Louisville's on another level. Now that said, I think when the two teams meet in the Fitzgerald Fieldhouse, aka Pitt, I think that's going to be an intense matchup right there, and I think Louisville is going to need to work for that win. And I think Pitt will come out fired up, because if Pitt wants to win the ACC, their level of errors in terms of winning the conference must be 0. Their margin of error is now very small. They can't afford to lose to teams that are ranked under them or whatnot. And they also got to be careful with some of the other stiffer competition. So we'll see. As for Notre Dame, I think Notre Dame can finish 500. Some of their matches are favorable, though they do have to play Louisville twice. And honestly, that's going to be a real tough matchup for Louisville. Or it's going to be a tough matchup for both teams. Notre Dame has just not been the team they have been expecting, but I'm not giving up on the Fighting Irish. I think Notre Dame can get the win. As Larry says, Louisville is a natty contender. I totally agree, and I would not be surprised if them and Kentucky battled it out in the NCAA tournament. Could they meet in the final? Possibly, but it would all depend on where the committee puts Kentucky and Louisville. Because the true number one team is Texas, and Texas hasn't really been challenged outside of Kansas taking the first 2 sets off of them, but Texas was able to reverse sweep them with the greatest of ease. So all in all, for the ACC, I still think it's most likely in anyone. It still can be won by anyone. The ACC has improved. Every team has gotten better, whether it's Miami. Miami's the true surprise team. North Carolina has kind of fallen back down to earth. Same with Duke, and same with NC State. Wake Forest is kind of a sleeper team, but I think that was because Notre Dame just did not have a good night. I'm still believing in Notre Dame. I still think they have the firepower when it comes to possibly winning or making an NCAA tournament run and making the NCAA tournament in general. So all in all, I think the ACC is still a conference to watch for, and I think any team can get hot at any moment. And again, don't sleep on Notre Dame. Now, as for the Pac-12, I'm not going to fully break down their matches. I did see that UCLA beat both Oregon schools. They swept Oregon, which was rather impressive. To me, I think UCLA was ranked underneath Oregon, and I don't think that is considered an upset at all. I just think that UCLA has a little bit more firepower, as Charity Looper has done an outstanding job as a freshman. I just think Oregon they're not quite complete, but they're starting to figure it out. On the topic of Oregon, they did have to go 5 sets with USC. Unfortunately for the Trojans, they were up 2-0 in the match, and then Oregon was able to come back to win the next 3 sets. And the worst part about that was that USC dodged 2 match points, but they couldn't win the next 2 points. So it's another scenario of USC came so close to winning to having a statement win, and then it just slipped through their fingers. This is the third time USC's had that scenario happen, that they've come so close to having that big standout win, and then they just lose it in the 5th set. It happened against San Diego, it happened against Creighton earlier on the season, and now it happened against Oregon. And that would have been a big win for USC had they beaten Oregon, because that would have kept them in the Pac-12 title hunt. They still can win the Pac-12, but it's rather tougher. It gets really tough for them, especially with this week. This week they are at home against the Washington schools, Washington State and Washington. And then, as Larry B and Gina were chatting it up in the chat room, they were talking about how Washington State swept Stanford. That was kind of surprising, just because I thought Stanford was going to have a little bit more to offer, especially since Washington had to go 4 sets with Cal, and Cal is kind of at the bottom of the barrel in terms of the Pac-12. But Washington is really good. Ever since they dropped those first 2 Pac-12 games to Utah and Washington State, they have not lost one. They have not lost another Pac-12 game. They have won 8 in a row, and this Washington team is starting to come on. And their only other loss was to Ohio State, which obviously the Buckeyes are indeed good. This week, Washington plays UCLA, and I will be previewing that in a little bit in the second half of the show. Gina says Stanford looks strong for a while, though. Yeah, I agree. I thought Stanford had some good moments against Washington. They did come off of that emotional roller coaster of a 5-set match against Washington State. And I kind of think Washington State came back down to earth a little bit when it came to facing Stanford. I think it just goes to show that Stanford is still up there in terms of talent and in terms of the Pac-12. Washington State is good. I think Washington State has a legit team. I think they have been posting noteworthy results. Even though they have been losing certain games, they have been competitive. They should have probably beaten UCLA the first time around, but this week is going to test them big time. Washington State is on the road against the USC and UCLA. Same with Washington. And that goes for Washington as well, especially if Washington State loses to UCLA and then Washington gets by USC, then on Sunday, Washington and UCLA face each other for first place in the Pac-12, and that is going to be the biggest matchup out there. And Larry says he gives props to Stanford. Yeah, and with how much Stanford has been through when it comes to last season, where their captain unfortunately was sidelined with COVID, and with what happened with all the CDC guidelines and everything that happened in the COVID year last spring, like Stanford is starting to like bring themselves back into, I wouldn't say relevancy, but they're bringing themselves back into the contention of being a title contender. Just because I think they are a good program. I think Stanford does have what it takes to make a NCAA title run. I think they are a dark horse team because looking at Stanford in the Pac-12, they are only one game back of UCLA and Washington. Same goes with Washington State. Now, as for the 6 and 4 teams, that consists of Oregon, Utah, and USC. Well, I think Oregon is one of the better teams in that 6 and 4 category. I think USC is on the cusp of they can win some of these games. It's just that they have to put together a complete game. And it really sucks for USC because I look at their roster, they have some talent on their team. It's just all about putting that talent together. And same can be said for Utah. Utah has a good team of their own. It's just that they have to put all that talent together. And that said on UCLA, and then going back to UCLA, I think UCLA's loss to Arizona State does not do them any justice because, number one, they were playing on the road, and number two, I think Arizona State is getting rather hot. In no pun intended, of course, because of Arizona. But Arizona State's actually pulled off some rather impressive victories as of late. Like, they had to go 5 with Washington, which wasn't bad. They had to go 5 with USC, in which they led 2-0. They beat UCLA last weekend, and then this past weekend they went 2-0 against the Colorado/Rocky Mountain schools. They beat Utah in 4 last weekend, on the road, mind you, and then they also beat Colorado in 4 last weekend as well. So Arizona State is currently at the moment 4-6 in the conference, but that 11-10 mark could loom large if, hence the word if, they finish 500 or better. Because looking at Arizona State's schedule, this week they are home against Cal, and then, sorry, my schedule is, they are home against Cal, and then they are home against Stanford. They're taking on the NorCal schools in Tempe. And then next week they've got the Washington schools, followed by the Rocky Mountain schools, then the SoCal schools on the road. And then they've got Oregon State as their second to last game, and then they've got their crosstown rival Arizona. Because I guess the Pac-12 has the true rivalry game as the final game of the season. Like USC, UCLA faces one another, Cal, Stanford takes on one another, Washington State, Washington takes on one another, Utah, Colorado takes on one another. You get what I'm trying to say. So for Arizona State, realistically, I can see them winning the 3 games for sure. I could see them beating Cal. So Cal, Oregon State, Arizona, that's 3 wins. But you have to factor in Washington or Stanford, which is a possible loss. Washington, possible loss. Washington State, possible loss. Colorado's not too terrible, but I could see that maybe as a loss. Utah, possible loss. UCLA, possible loss, especially since that's going to be at UCLA. And then USC is 50-50, just because USC is kind of that Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde team. Like sometimes USC will put together a complete game, and then sometimes they'll come close, and then they'll just give it away, or they'll just be altogether not so good. They're kind of the 3-headed monster in a sort. So we'll see what happens in the Pac-12. Once again, I didn't mean to dedicate a full segment to this, but it's kind of come down to it that I didn't fully break down their matches, but I dedicated a nice portion of this recap segment from last week to this conference. Because let's all be real. Pac-12 is the most exciting conference, which isn't going to have a possible undefeated team. Like, the ACC has Louisville in first place that's undefeated, not only in conference, but overall. Texas has the Big 12 has Texas, which is undefeated in conference and overall. Then the Big 12 has Nebraska, that's undefeated in conference play. And then the SEC has Kentucky, which is undefeated in conference play. So that just leaves the only Power 5 conference without a blemish in terms of conference play, which is the Pac-12, which Washington and UCLA have that top spot shared with one another. So that is going to do it in terms of recapping everything. Before we take our commercial break, we need to get into the top 25 because there wasn't any teams that dropped out this past week, but there was some shuffling in terms of spots outside of the top 5. So 21 through 25 consists of Pepperdine at 25, Creighton at 24, Florida at 23, Washington State at 22, and Tennessee at 21. 16 through 20 consists of San Diego at 20, Utah at 19, Western Kentucky at 18, Oregon at 17, and UCLA at 16. 11 through 15 consists of Stanford at 15, Georgia Tech at 14, Penn State at 13, Purdue at 12, and Minnesota at 11. 6 through 10 consists of Baylor at 10, Ohio State at 9, Washington at 8, BYU at 7, and Nebraska at 6. And then 1 through 5 consists of Kentucky at 5, Pitt at 4, Wisconsin at 3, Louisville at 2, and then I kind of already gave away who the number 1 team was, but the number 1 team is Texas, which is no surprise. They have been number 1 ever since the season started, which is mad props to Texas for being that consistent. So, something I do need to talk about in terms of the top 25, I'm surprised Tennessee did not fall further than number 20, considering they lost not a bad loss, but it was not a good loss for them losing to LSU. I thought Tennessee, again, I thought they shouldn't have looked ahead, or I don't know what happened, but honestly, I was rather disappointed that they got swept. Now, if they had lost in 5 to LSU, I wouldn't have been overly surprised, but LSU just really brought it to Tennessee. Another noteworthy matchup that happened involving 2 ranked teams was BYU sweeping San Diego. Rather surprised to see San Diego getting the pants beat or shorts beaten off of them, considering I thought they were a little better than that, but BYU is a very talented team. Like I said, BYU was very young last year. They had a bunch of freshmen and sophomores, but then ever since they won the conference last year, they've just continued to get better, as Kenzie Kerber has just been an outstanding job as she transferred as a graduate transfer from Utah. And then Gretchen Reiner has done a solid job being a serving specialist, a serving and defensive specialist. And then all in all, BYU has been rather consistent this season. Like, I don't think they've had a match in the West Coast Conference go 5 sets, which is really impressive. I think BYU could be a possible dark horse. I don't think they could win it all, but at the same time, I think they are a team to watch for, just because their only loss of the season was to Pitt, and there's not much separating BYU and Pitt, only Kentucky and Nebraska. But we have seen that Pitt hasn't really been invincible. They lost to Georgia Tech, and then obviously they just barely lost to Louisville. So all in all, for Pitt, I think they'll be fine. I don't think anybody should be writing them off. I think they still have the makings of possibly winning an NCAA championship. It's just all about if they can play their best volleyball in the NCAA tournament. And even if it means having to play against Texas, then so be it. Nothing's going to be easy for them going forward. And when they play that Louisville matchup, the second go-around at Fitzgerald Fieldhouse, I expect Pitt to be on its best game. Because now they'll have a better understanding of what to expect from Louisville. But all in all, that's going to do it for the top 25 and for the recap of last week. Let's take ourselves a quick little commercial break. When we come back, we've got some big news that happened in the Big West Conference. Then we got to look at this week's noteworthy matchups in NCAA women's volleyball. And also, I'll talk briefly about some high school volleyball in Southern California. So you are listening to Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that sports. We'll be right back after this.
What's up, sports fans? Are you looking for the latest on Northern California sports? Then take a trip out west with me, your host, Gina G, on Reppin' the NorCal Sports, right here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports. I'll be bringing it to you all the way live every Monday at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern. And it's always a packed show. I'll bring you everything Dynastic 49ers, the bite of the San Jose Sharks, torture of the San Francisco Giants, the Golden State Warriors that we still believe. Then take you across the bay to the rise and grind of the Oakland A's. I've got you covered on college ball from the Cal Bears to the Stanford Cardinal, so that no matter what, reppin' in NorCal sports is always reppin' the Bay. So if you bleed red and gold, or you're looking to keep an eye out west in them thar hills, don't miss me, Gina G, on reppin' in NorCal sports. Catch me every Monday at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, and I'll have your fandom repped harder than a trio of defenders guarding Stephen Curry before his buzzer beater is Gucci.
What is going on, everybody? My name is Harrison Glazer, and we're coming at you from the Show That Never Sleeps podcast. I cover the Jets, the Islanders, the Nets, and the Yankees.
This is Pierre Moss, and I cover the Mets, Knicks, Rangers, and the Giants.
Our show is live every Wednesday through Spreaker and a bunch of other ways to get our content. Again, we're the Show That Never Sleeps podcast. We talk about all those New York sports. It's a lot of fun. We get into all of it. Please tune in. Again, that's Wednesdays at 6 p.m.
And we look forward to having you guys right here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
What's happening, sports fans? Are you a fan of Southern California sports? Are you looking for a show hotter than a hot summer day in California? Then look no further than the SoCal Supreme Sports Show, where I talk about all things Southern California sports. That's right, all sports teams from Southern California. From the hard-hitting tackles of the NFL, to the killer crossovers and big three-pointers of the NBA and WNBA, to the grand slams of the MLB, to the bone-chilling goals of the NHL, and to the booming kicks of the MLS, the SoCal Supreme Sports Show has it all for you. Oh, and let us not forget about the college sports as well. So join me, Teran Rodriguez, every week here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
What's good, fight fans? It's your boy, Marcus Los Rate, here to give ya what you want, here to give ya what you need. Yeah, man. Yeah. I'm coming to you live, straight from your mama's basement with a crispy, awesome white tea. They're coming to you live every Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Powered by IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
And we are back with the second half of Set Point. Thank you all for joining me on this beautiful Monday evening. I appreciate you all. You can check out all of iSports Radio's amazing shows on several different streaming platforms, such as Spreaker, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Podcast Addict, YouTube, Spotify. And you can catch this show on iHeartRadio, which is really cool. So definitely do check out all of our amazing shows on IE Sports Radio. We have several different sports shows, or several different shows, such as Reppin' to NorCal Sports with Gina G. We also have Gloves Off with Marcus Losgreat, which talks about combat sports. Reppin' to NorCal Sports talks about Northern California sports. My other show, the SoCal Supreme Sports Show, talks about Southern California sports. Larry B has plenty of shows, such as the Sports Couples Perspective, which is hosted by he and his lovely soon-to-be wife, Cecilia. And we have lots of shows that are basically on the horizon. As Gina says, best volleyball show ever. I appreciate you, Gina, and I appreciate all the work that you do when it comes to Reppin' to NorCal sports. Now let's get on into segment number 2 with Set Point, and she says tomorrow's show on Reppin' to NorCal Sports is going to be awesome. So there was some news that I got today, and unfortunately it's not the best of news that I didn't want to hear. So Long Beach State, which is basically the women's volleyball team I basically go to in terms of its games and whatnot. So Long Beach State Long Beach State Athletics has decided to move on from Joy McKienzie-Fuerbringer. In other words, she was relieved of her coaching duties today, and to me this kind of hurts just because she's kind of the first volleyball coach I interacted in terms of Long Beach State. I mean, I also interacted with Alan Knight, but I mainly interacted with Joy when it came to women's volleyball, and I enjoyed interviewing her and her players after the game and in the post-conference, and I was heartbroken to see this. Now, Long Beach State hasn't really gotten the results that it's been looking for. Last weekend was not a good weekend, as last weekend they lost to UC Davis in 4, or they lost in UC Davis in 3. Yes, Gina, UC Davis beat Long Beach State. Unfortunately. I'm kidding. UC Davis earned the victory. Like, they're under the radar. And then also Long Beach State the night before lost to UC Riverside in 5 sets. And then the previous week they lost to UC Irvine in 5 sets. So I don't think it's Joy's fault. Like, I hate that the school had to do this right now. I hate how they had to relieve her of her coaching duties in the middle of the season. Well, like in the middle of the conference, but I hate how they had to do that to her. It really sucks. I think they should have waited until the end of the season to do so, just because it kind of affects the players' minds. It's like how USC football fired Clay Helton in the middle of the season. Well, not in the middle of the season, like after the second game of the season. So I really didn't agree with this, and I think it's kind of it wasn't a big mistake, but it was kind of a mistake firing her in the middle of the season. And don't get me wrong, Joy is a fantastic coach. Like, she and her husband, Matt Fuerbringer, are basically the best assistant coach and a head coach combination. Well, were the best until, unfortunately, Joy got the walking papers, which was unfortunate, and it really is heartbreaking, personally. As actually, believe it or not, the coaching staff now no longer has Matt Fuerbringer on the coaching staff, as well as the coaching staff only consists of Sabrina Hernandez and Andrew Pham, which is the volunteer assistant coach. And Sabrina Hernandez has been named interim head coach, which makes sense because she's a former Long Beach State player. But today, the news was delivered at about 11. Oh, it was actually delivered at 1:30. The press release came at 1:30, but I think the news was delivered, I think, a little earlier, but still. So the press release reads as follows. Joy McKienzie-Fuerbringer, head coach of the Long Beach State University women's volleyball program, has been relieved of coaching duties effective immediately, Executive Director of Athletics Andy Fee announced Monday. Making a coaching change is never easy. And this quote is important. This is from Andy Fee. Making a coaching change is never easy, but it's an especially difficult decision when you know that coach has history with our program and university, said Fee. However, after a thorough review and evaluation of our program, the past 5 years have not met expectations for a program with a rich tradition and legacy of championships. We thank Joy for her service to our campus and her unquestionable commitment to our student athletes. Now, I understand that the program has not gone in the direction that it wants to go, as Joy McKienzie-Fuerbringer had a 47-61 record with Long Beach State, and they only made the postseason once, and that was 2019 when it made the NIVC, which is basically the NIT of NCAA women's volleyball. It's disappointing, but it's tough when you're not in a Power 5 conference school. Like, I think Long Beach State should have waited till after the season to relieve her of her coaching duties. But to me, I think it's unfortunately the correct call. Again, I hate how they did it so in the middle of the season, but the record kind of speaks for itself. So, like I said, Sabrina Hernandez is now the interim head coach for the time being, and as well, the press release also says in her fifth season in charge of the beach. That was Joy McKienzie-Fuerbringer was in her 5th season in charge of the beach. Long Beach State will begin a national search for a head coach. And then it also states that Sabrina Hernandez will serve as interim coach. And then currently Long Beach State is 9-12 overall and 3-7 in the Big West Conference. There are 10 conference matches remaining. So she kind of got fired in the middle of conference play. Or, I'm sorry, she got relieved of her duties. I won't say fired because that's kind of an extreme word. But she got relieved of her coaching duties, and it really sucks. I still think she's a fantastic coach, and I think she can get back on her feet because she does have a great tradition in terms of coaching and whatnot. But I don't think she's going to rush back into coaching rather soon, considering she also has her daughter, which plays at Miracosta High School. She's a stud. I think I already talked about that. But I think she might take a couple days to let this compress and then basically just say, I'm no longer the head coach at Long Beach State, which sucks, but it is what it is. I just hate how it had to come to this. I think it doesn't help that Joy had to deal with the COVID season, and then she also had to deal with players transferring out of Long Beach State, which really is a bummer. But honestly, I'm not the athletic director and whatnot, so it's unfortunate that this had to happen. But I wish Joy McKienzie-Fuerbringer the best. I will remember all of my favorite memories with her and how I got to interview her after games, and it was an honor to have her. And I wish she could have been a guest on Set Point, but unfortunately, she and I didn't really get back to one another when it came to her being a guest during the COVID season. But I digress on that. So anyway, Long Beach State, like it said, they have 10 games remaining, and this weekend they hit the road to play Cal State Bakersfield, a team that they lost to earlier in conference play. So there's that. And then the day after, Long Beach State plays Cal Poly at Cal Poly. So it's a 2-game road trip this weekend. And then next week they are on the road against Cal State Fullerton. And then they're back home next Saturday against Hawaii. Now, if I wasn't so busy next week, possibly, I would totally go to Long Beach State, Hawaii. But unfortunately, I am busy and I will just not have the time. So, and then also I won't be able to go to Bakersfield just because it's pretty far, and also I don't really have ties to Bakersfield. I was having a tough time having to get a press pass to go to the UCI Long Beach State women's volleyball match. So it is what it is, unfortunately. And then once again, I do wish Joy McKienzie-Fuerbringer the best, and I really hate that this had to happen to her. I just think that this isn't really fair to her, because last year Long Beach State had to deal with the COVID season, and then they also had to deal with players transferring out, and then last year the Big West didn't have a women's volleyball season. So I think maybe Long Beach State kind of gave Joy a raw deal, but that's just my opinion. I really think that Joy deserves a little bit better, and I don't know who's gonna take over, because it's a lot of shoes to fill. Like, the previous coach, Brian Gimilaro, lasted quite a while until he decided to step away due to personal reasons. So, all in all, whoever takes over Long Beach State will have a lot of shoes to fill, and then also they're going to have to be consistent when it comes to bringing the beach back to its winning ways. Not that Joy didn't do that, but I think that Joy did a good job with her job, and I think that Long Beach State still will be in good hands no matter who they get. And also, I think Long Beach State can pull off a big win, even though Sabrina Hernandez will be the interim coach. One team that really struggles in the pyramid is UC Santa Barbara. They have not won in the pyramid since 2012 or 2011. Regardless, it's been a while since UC Santa Barbara has won at the pyramid, so if you're looking to make money and you're taking the underdog, take Long Beach State over Santa Barbara. At the pyramid, mind you. So, that's basically going to do it in terms of that news. I didn't really want to go too ham on this, but I think it's just not fair that she got canned in the middle of the season, or in the middle of conference play. So, I hope she does get a head coaching job soon. Whether it's on the high school level, the junior college level, or the 4-year level, I hope she does get another coaching job. And whoever lands her is going to be one lucky program that gets her. I don't even know who would want to take over Long Beach State at this point. I don't think Sabrina Hernandez will be the head coach, but I don't even know who's a possible candidate to maybe take over the position. I don't even know who's available. Like, maybe Mick Haley, but he's doing other things when it comes to volleyball. So I don't think he'll want to take over, but we'll see what happens. All in all, that's going to do it for this little bit of volleyball news. Now let's jump to some high school volleyball news. So I'm going to talk briefly about the CIF Southern Section playoffs. So basically, the girls volleyball playoffs are underway. The Division I playoff has 10 teams, and then a majority of the teams were on bye. But in the first round, we had Harvard-Westlake taking down Redondo Union in 5 sets. And to me, I think Harvard-Westlake deserved to win, but I do feel for Redondo Union. They were not at full strength. They were missing 2 of their top players going into the match, and then they missed a 3rd player who got hurt in warm-ups. So all in all, it really did not do the Seahawks any good when it came to being shorthanded. Excuse me. But Harvard-Westlake did deserve the win, and they will take on the number 1 seed Marymount. And Marymount is a fantastic team. They are the only team undefeated in Southern California in terms of the Division I bracket. And then Sierra Canyon was able to edge out San Clemente in 5 sets. Now, San Clemente was kind of the suspect team when it came to Division I. They are a good team, but I don't think they were the greatest team. Sierra Canyon just had a little bit more oomph in their game, and winning on the road is tough. Like that's a long drive from San Clemente to Chatsworth, which is where Sierra Canyon is located. And yes, this is the same Sierra Canyon that LeBron James's kid goes to. So Sierra Canyon heads to the quarterfinals where they will face Mater Dei, aka the Sports Factory, or the Football Factory mainly, but I think it's basically going to be a barn burner between Sierra Canyon and Mater Dei, even though I think Mater Dei is most likely going to win. So we'll see. And then the other 2 quarterfinal matchups consist of Miracosta, which has Joy McKienzie-Fuerbringer's daughter on it, and Village Christian. And then we also have Lakewood at Vista Marietta, which I think Lakewood is probably the dark horse to win Division I. I would not be surprised if they won the Division I playoffs. But all in all, I think Lakewood's a team to watch for. That team has a lot of talent on their team. And I did pick Mater Dei to win it. For those that were closely watching my tweets and updates on me picking the winners of each bracket. So we'll see what happens going forward. So you'll probably be seeing more Maine high school volleyball on my main Twitter account and not through the Set Point account. Just because I think everyone wants to see more college volleyball on the Set Point account. But who knows? All right, that's enough college or high school volleyball for a while. Now let's talk about the upcoming matches for this weekend. And it's going to be a fun one. Or for this week in general. So there's actually not too many that I found, but I found quite a bit. So Wednesday we have number 3 Wisconsin at number 6 Nebraska. It's another big matchup for Nebraska, as if they win this matchup, this could be the nail in the coffin of Nebraska's going to win this conference, or they're going to win the Big Ten. Because Nebraska has been on a tear, and I think they're going to finally silence the Heretics if they can defeat Wisconsin. Nebraska does have another big matchup ahead on their schedule, but against Wisconsin, it's going to be a tall task trying to take down Dana Retke and Grace Loberg and all those other talented players. And neither of these teams played one another last week because Wisconsin had COVID issues within their program, which really broke my heart. And it really made Nebraska fans get their undies in a bunch, but I digress. And then one more thing to add to Wisconsin-Nebraska is that Nebraska, like I said, if they win this one, then they are pretty much the heavy favorite to winning the Big Ten. This puts them 2 games ahead of Wisconsin. But if Wisconsin wins, then it's a whole different ballgame in the Big Ten. If I had to pick, I'd say Wisconsin wins, but I would not be surprised if Nebraska won. Like I said all the time, I will eat my crow if I'm wrong, and boy howdy, I will be eating lots of crow from Nebraska, especially if their fans do actually hear this. If they do hear that I said I'm picking Wisconsin over Nebraska. I mean, I think Nebraska is a very good team, but I think this is kind of their biggest test of all. So Elsewhere on Wednesday, we have another big matchup. This time it comes from the SEC. It'll be number 5 Kentucky at number 21 Tennessee. This is a big rivalry game as Tennessee will have to defend the checkerboard against the Wildcats. As Kentucky is undefeated in the SEC, a win over Tennessee would pretty much put them in the driver's seat. But if Tennessee does manage to beat Kentucky, it would be a big win for them, probably even bigger than the Baylor win. And then also, it would put Tennessee a lot closer to Kentucky, and it would also give them the tiebreaker because the two teams are only facing each other one time this year. So there's that. But I'd have to say Kentucky takes down Nebraska if I had to pick. I hope I'm wrong because I want to see the underdog topple the top dog. And I also want to see some chaos in the SEC. And also some chaos in the Big Ten. So there's that. So jumping to Friday, some noteworthy matchups include number 8 Washington at USC. So if USC actually pulls off this win, I will be darn right impressed. And it will also help out UCLA as USC is long yearning for that another big victory as they got one a few weeks ago against Washington State, and they also got one a couple weekends ago against Colorado, but they haven't really gotten a big victory, but I think a win over Washington would be as big as they come. So for Washington, they cannot look ahead. This is probably a trap game for them. If they look ahead to UCLA on Sunday, that will be their most biggest and most crucial mistake ever. So I think for Washington, they just got to play their game. USC does serve tough, so that is something to note. But for Washington, I think they just got to play their game, and they can't just let Sam Drexel do all the work. They got to get other players involved, like Marin Grote and whatnot. So we'll see what happens. Elsewhere in the Pac-12, we have number 19 Utah at number 17 Oregon. That's going to be a fun matchup. It's the battle of two 6-3 teams. And these are two teams that are looking to basically right the wrongs of their ship in terms of getting back into the Pac-12 championship race. And I think both of these teams do have a good shot of winning the Pac-12, but honestly, I expect Oregon to come out better than what they did last week, because I think they do have a good team. It's just that against UCLA, they ran into a much better team, and then against USC, I think they started off slow, and then it took them a while to get it together. So for Oregon, I think they have to do a better job of starting out better, because if they don't, then it's not going to be a pretty matchup. And they can't afford to just reverse sweep everybody. It does not work that way. So we'll see what happens with that matchup. And then also in the Pac-12, we have number 22 Washington State at number 16 UCLA. So this matchup is a big-time grudge match as Washington State came oh so close to defeating UCLA in Pullman. Unfortunately, UCLA escaped with the win, courtesy of a big game from McMay. UCLA may need another big game from McMay just because Washington State is right behind UCLA in terms of the Pac-12 standings. If Washington State does beat UCLA, which I don't think it'll happen, but it's possible. If Washington State upsets UCLA, I think that'll be the biggest win for Washington State, and also it'll put Washington State a lot closer to winning the Pac-12. They're not in first place. They are currently in second, well, tied for second with Oregon. But I think that Washington State, or I'm sorry, not Oregon, they're tied with Stanford, but I think if Washington State wins, this will be a big-time win for them, and also it'll put them in a better position in terms of the Pac-12. So, all in all, for Washington State, would be a crucial win, and if they also beat USC, it would be an added bonus because they will have pulled off the win in Galen Center and Pauley Pavilion, and those are two tough gymnasiums to win in terms of the West Coast. For UCLA, they cannot afford to look ahead. Just like Washington can't look ahead to UCLA, UCLA can't look ahead to Washington. They have to get the job done against this tough Washington State team. And I think they can. They just can't bank on Mac May a whole lot. Like, they got to get other players involved, too. Charity Looper does a great job with that. And then also Anna Dodson can contribute as well. So, all in all, for UCLA, they just have to make sure that Mac May isn't swinging 95% of the time, and they have to make sure they distribute everything in a certain balance. Now, jumping over to the Big East, we have number 24 Creighton at Marquette. So this is the second matchup between Creighton and Marquette. The first matchup, Creighton was able to defeat Marquette in 4 sets at Creighton. So this matchup is going to be very crucial for Marquette. Creighton and Marquette, as well as UConn and St. John's, are amongst the top teams in the Big East. I haven't really checked the standings all that recent, but all in all, Marquette knows how important beating Creighton is, especially since this is kind of their big-time rivalry game with them. I think Marquette has a good chance at it, but Creighton is back to being the competitive bully in the Big East. Ever since that loss, they haven't really lost their touch, and Nora Sis has just been doing great guns for Creighton, so we'll see. And then bouncing back to the West Coast, in the West Coast Conference, we have number 25 Pepperdine hitting the road to take on LMU in the PCH Cup. The first matchup between these two was very close. LMU nearly pulled off the upset, but fell just short to Pepperdine. LMU is a respectable team, and I think they could be a bubble team when it comes to making the NCAA tournament. Also considering that they have a good track record of wins. The problem is they haven't really beaten a ranked team. They haven't beaten, all their losses are to ranked teams. They lost to Purdue, they lost to BYU, they lost to San Diego in 5, and then they also lost to Pepperdine in 5. And they also lost to Purdue and BYU in 4. So it's not like LMU is getting blown out, but I think LMU they need that big-time victory. They need that victory that'll make the committee say, hey, we got to put LMU in here because they have an impressive record, and they have this win, that win, and that win, and that win. So I think for LMU, I expect them to come out fired up, especially since it's at their place, and it's a rivalry game. LMU and Pepperdine in the PCH Cup, it doesn't get any better than that. So we'll see if the Lions can pull off their first biggest win of the season. I think it's doable, but honestly, don't sleep on this Pepperdine team. Pepperdine also needs the win in order to keep pace with BYU and San Diego. Even though I think that them winning the West Coast Conference could be out of their hands unless BYU and San Diego collapse, which I highly doubt, but we'll see what happens. Jumping to Saturday, we have number 6 Nebraska at number 11 Minnesota. That's a very good matchup right there. It's another big test for Nebraska, as Nebraska actually has to hit the road to take on Minnesota. But honestly, I think Minnesota is going to have to break out the big defensive battle. And also, they cannot let Stephanie Samity just carry the team 95% of the time. Samity is a great player, obviously, but you can't just take 100 swings and have half the kills that Minnesota has as a team. Now for Nebraska, they're kind of the opposite. They distribute the offense quite evenly, and they're using their underclassmen to their advantage, and that's kind of been great for Nebraska, considering Nebraska definitely wants to prove that they are amongst the top teams in the nation, let alone in the Big Ten. So they have to prove that they can win on the road, and they've been doing a good job of that. But it's now all about if they can do so against this tough Minnesota team, which is arguably one of the better defensive teams in the conference. So we'll see if Nebraska can pull off the win. I'm confident Nebraska can beat Minnesota, but again, I'll eat my crow if I'm wrong. And then jumping to Sunday, it's basically mainly filled with Pac-12 matchups, but I do got to make note of this Big Ten matchup between number 3 Wisconsin and number 12 Purdue. Purdue had themselves an awful week last week, as they wound up losing 2 games, one of which was to, Michigan State, and then the other was to Nebraska. So Wisconsin, on the other hand, will be coming off of their win, or will be coming off of their game against Nebraska. I'm not sure if they'll win, but I wouldn't doubt it. So for Wisconsin, they'll be hitting the road to take on Purdue. I think Purdue will come out a little fired up, but I think ultimately Wisconsin defeats Purdue. I do not see Purdue winning this matchup, especially after last week. Like, Dana Rettke is a force at the net, and so are a bunch of the other players, such as Grace Loberg, Devin Robinson, even Anna Smrek, the 6'9" player. Like, definitely don't sleep on her. And then Sydney Hilly definitely does a great job of being the floor general for Wisconsin. And all in all, it's going to be a chess match, but I think, for me, Wisconsin plays chess while Purdue plays checkers. So that's just my opinion. Now we jump to the Pac-12. So this matchup, in terms of the Pac-12, that's noteworthy, is between Colorado receiving votes against Oregon. Now, Colorado has kind of been undeserving when it comes to being ranked, and they're currently not ranked. They are receiving votes. But for me, this could be a big matchup for Colorado to get back on track. With how wacky the Pac-12 is, I would not be surprised if Colorado won, but if I'm a gambling man, I'd take Oregon in a heartbeat. And then also in the Pac-12, we have number 22 Washington State at USC. Now, this is another grudge match that I'm keeping my eye on because Washington State lost to USC in Pullman. So for Washington State to be successful, they have to mind their P's and Q's. They have to slow down Brooke Botkin and Shannon Scully if they have Shannon Scully playing outside hitter and not libero. Like, they've been shuffling her around at the libero position versus the outside hitter position. And then they also got to slow down Candice Denny and Amelia Vesca. So, all in all, for Washington State, it's a crucial matchup. They cannot afford to lose that type of matchup, even though USC is kind of on the bubble of being a good team versus being a team that is probably going to miss the cut when it comes to making the NCAA tournament. But USC does need a big-time win such as that. I mean, Washington State isn't that big time, but I think it would be beneficial to them. So, we'll see. And then the creme de la creme matchup of Sunday happens to be number 8 Washington at number 16 UCLA. For UCLA, this is actually their redemption match against Washington just because, remember, they lost off of a heartbreaker. They lost in a reverse sweep as Washington was down 2-0, and then they came back to win the next 3 sets. And then UCLA, they got to defend home court. They know how big this matchup is. They have to come up big. It cannot just be the McAmey show. They obviously will get help from Charity Looper. But for Washington, they're going to have to basically block well. I think Washington does block the ball well, and they do distribute the offense quite nicely. I also should make note that LMA Powell, I think, is their all-time assist leader. I think someone was one of their all-time assist leaders, but I'm not entirely certain which one was that. But all in all, for Washington, LMA Powell does distribute the ball quite well, so, and the same can be said for Shelby Martin, so I'm really looking forward to Washington versus UCLA, and I think that's going to be a nice little matchup. Sneaky good matchup to watch for is Stanford versus Arizona State. If Stanford wins, I will not be surprised, but if Arizona State wants to prove that it's for real, beating Stanford would be the best thing for them. I don't think it'll happen, but I'm most likely certain Arizona State can give them a good fight. Again, I'll eat my crow if I'm wrong, but I would take Stanford in a heartbeat, but I wouldn't doubt Arizona State. I think Arizona State is getting slept on, and they're trying to put some respect on everyone. They want everyone to put some respect on their name. So we shall see what happens with that Pac-12 matchup. I know it's mainly a Pac-12 dominated match, or a Pac-12 dominated slate along with some Big Ten, but there weren't really too many noteworthy matches when it came to ranked versus ranked. But if I do find some other noteworthy matchups to watch for, I will let you all know via the Set Point account. But with that being said, that is going to do it for this week's episode of Set Point. Without any further delay, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to drop that beat, because I'm about to dip like a banana in chocolate. You feel me? Thank you all once again for tuning in to Set Point. I know this was another long episode, but I'm glad you all tuned in. I'll try to condense this to as short as possible, maybe to like an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes. Appreciate the chat room tuning in on Spreaker, Larry B and Gina G. I appreciate you too tuning in. Appreciate everybody tuning in live or on the playback or in the wee hours of the morning. I really do appreciate you, because without you, this show, as well as any other show on IE Sports Radio, would not be possible. For everyone here at IE Sports Radio, this is Teran Rodriguez signing off. Coming up in about 15 minutes is Bases Loaded. They'll be talking about the World Series. I'll be seeing you all Friday for the SoCal Supreme Sports Show. You have a great week. Enjoy the volleyball that's happening. If you're in California, such as myself, enjoy the CIF Southern Section Girls Volleyball Playoffs. And I'll see you Friday for the SoCal Supreme Sports Show. Peace!